or Perennial Philosophy, Aldous Huxley, page 48. It is in virtue of his absorption in God, and just because he has not identified his being with the inborn or acquired elements of his private personality, that the saint is able to exercise his entirely non-cohesive and therefore entirely beneficent influence on individuals, even on whole societies. Or, to be more accurate, it is because he has purged himself of selfness that divine reality is able to use him as a channel of grace and power. Quote, I live, not I, but Christ, the eternal Logos, liveth in me. Here the prior reading was about Word made flesh, so this is kind of topical. True of the saint, this must a avatori be true of the avatar or incarnation of God, if so far as he was a saint, St. Paul was, quote, not I, then certainly Christ was not I. And to talk as so many liberal churchmen now do of worshiping the personality of Jesus is an absurdity. For obviously, had Jesus remained content merely to have a personality, like the rest of us, he would never have exercised the kind of influence which in fact he did exercise. It would never have occurred to anyone to regard him as a divine incarnation, to identify him with the Logos. That he came to be thought of as Christ was due to the fact that he had passed beyond selfness and had become the bodily and mental conduit through which a more than personal supernatural life flowed down into the world. Souls which have come to the unitive knowledge of God are, in Bennett of Canfield's phrase, quote, almost nothing in themselves and all in God. This vanishing residue of selfness persists because, in some slight measure, they are still identify their being with some inane psychophysical idiosyncrasy, some acquired habit of thought or feeling, some convention or unanalyzed prejudice current in the social environment. Jesus was almost wholly absorbed in the essential will of God, but in spite of this, he may have retained some elements of selfness. To what extent there was any I associated with the more than personal divine not I, it is very difficult on the basis of the existing evidence to judge. For example, did Jesus interpret his experience of divine reality and his own spontaneous inferences from that experience in terms of those fascinating apocalyptical notions current in contemporary Jewish circles? Some eminent scholars have argued that the doctrine of the world's imminent dissolution was the central core of his teaching. Others, equally learned, have held that it was attributed to him by the authors of the Synoptic Gospels, and that Jesus himself did not identify his experience and his theological thinking with local popular opinions. Which party is right, goodness knows, on this subject as on so many others. The existing evidence does not permit of a certain and unambiguous answer. The moral of all this is plain. The quantity and the quality of the surviving biographical documents as such that we have no means of knowing what the residual personality of Jesus was really like. But if the Gospels tell us very little about the I, which was Jesus, they make up for this deficiency by telling us inferentially in the parables and discourses a great deal about the spiritual not I, whose manifest presence in the mortal man was the reason why his disciples called him the Christ and identified him with the eternal Logos. The biography of a saint or avatar is valuable only insofar as it throws light upon the means by which, in circumstances of a particular human life, that the I was purged away so as to make room for the divine not I. The authors of the Synoptic Gospels do not choose to write such a biography, and no amount of textual criticism or ingenious surmise can call it into existence. The course of the last 100 years, our enormous sum of energy has been expended on the attempt to make documents yield more evidence that, in fact, they contain. How regrettable may be the synoptists' lack of interest in biography, whatever objectives may be raised against the theologies of Paul and John, there can still be no doubt that the instinct was essentially sound. Each in his own way wrote about the eternal not I, O Christ, rather than the historical I. Each in his own way stressed that element in the life of Jesus in which, because it is more than personal, all persons can participate, the nature of selfness, such that one person cannot be part of another person. Self can contain or be contained by something that is either less or more than a self. It can never contain or be contained by a self. The doctrine that God can be incarnated in human form is found in most of the principal historic expositions of the Perennial Philosophy. Seems God can incarnate into in Hinduism, Mahayana Buddhism, in Christianity, and in the Mohammedanism of the Sufis, by whom the prophet was equated with the eternal Logos. When goodness grows weak, when evil increases, I make myself a body. Quote. Who says that? God. God says this. When goodness grows weak, when evil increases, I make myself a body. This is from the Bhagavad Gita. Every age I come back to deliver the holy, to destroy the sin of the sinners, to establish righteousness. He who knows the nature of my task and my holy birth is not reborn. When he leaves this body, he comes to me. Flying from me, fear, from lust and anger, he hides in me, his refuge and safety burnt clean in the blaze of my being. In me, many find home. That's God or Krishna speaking in the Bhagavad Gita. When the Blessed One spoke and said, "No, Vasita," that from time to time a Tathagata is born into the world, a fully enlightened one, blessed and worthy, abounding in wisdom and goodness, happy with knowledge of the worlds, unsurpassed as a guide in erring mortals, a teacher of gods and men, a blessed Buddha. He thoroughly understands this universe as though he saw it face to face. Truth does he clearly came, both in its letters and in its spirit, lovely in its origin, lovely in its progress, lovely in its consummation. A higher life doth he make known in all its purity and all its perfectness. Tavidka Sutra. It's a quote. Krishna is an incarnation of Brahman, Gautama Buddha of what the Mahayanas call the Dharmakaya, suchness, mind, and the spiritual ground of all being. The Christian doctrine of the incarnation of Godhead in the human form differs from that of the India and the Far East insomuch as it affirms that there has been and can be only one avatar. What we do depends on large measure upon what we think, and if what we do is evil, there is good empirical reason for supposing that our thought patterns are inadequate to material, mental, or spirituality, because Christians believed that there had been only one Avatar. Christian history has been disgraced by more and bloody or crusades. It's a disgrace. Because there's only one. Interdenominational wars, persecutions, and proselytizing, imperialism. Then has the history of Hinduism and Buddhism. Seems very true. Absurd and idolatrous doctrines affirming the quasi-divine nature of sovereign states and their rulers have led Oriental, no less than Western peoples, into innumerable political wars, but because they have not believed in an exclusive revelation at one sole instant of time, or in the quasi-divinity of an ecclesiastical organization, Oriental priests have kept remarkably clear of the mass murder for religion's sake, which has been so dreadfully frequent in Christendom. And while in this important respect the level of public morality has been lower in the West than in the East, the levels of exceptional sanctity and of ordinary human morality have not, so far as one can judge from the available evidence, been any higher. If the tree is indeed known by its fruits, Christianity's departure from the norm of the perennial philosophy would seem to be philosophically unjustifiable. We are reading about the Logos within an incarnation within the Perennial Philosophy, page 48 to 51.